When a woman is sold by her own parents for being barren, fate still has a way of rewriting her story. Texas territory, November 1873. The wind carried dust across the endless plains, and every breath tasted of struggle. In those days, survival was not promised, and honor often weighed heavier than love. Families cared more about their names than their children's silent cries. In a world where gold was rare but cruelty was common, one young woman lived with a secret pain. She had been called barren, a word that cut deeper than any knife. Her parents, blinded by shame, saw her not as a daughter but as a burden. And so, on a cold evening, they chose to sell her, trading her future for their pride. She walked into the unknown, her heart trembling, her eyes filled with quiet storms. But destiny was watching. In that same land, a lonely cowboy with 5 children carried his own sorrow, and soon their broken paths were about to collide forever. Under the cold Texas moon of November 1873, the young woman walked with trembling hands, her fate no longer her own, as her parents' whispers still echoed in her mind, cruel and sharp, telling her she was useless, unworthy, and barren, words that had burned her spirit until nothing but silence remained. They had not looked at her as a daughter that night, but as a burden to be rid of, a problem to be solved by selling her like cattle at the edge of town, and though her lips did not part to plead, her soul screamed inside, yet no one heard her pain. No one cared to stop the deal that traded her future for a handful of coins. And as she was led away, the dust rose beneath her feet, carrying her sorrow across the lonely frontier where shadows stretched like endless chains, each step reminding her that she belonged nowhere, that love had abandoned her, that family had chosen pride over her tears. And still she walked, her chest heavy with betrayal, her eyes fixed on a horizon that offered no promise, only the bitter taste of despair. The men who had taken her spoke in low tones, rough and careless, as if she were not human but an object, a transaction completed under the silent witness of the stars. And she lowered her gaze, praying for strength to survive another day, because in that moment the world seemed colder than the wind that cut across the plains. And though fear wrapped around her heart like iron chains, there was a small spark deep within, fragile but alive, whispering that this would not be the end of her story, that somewhere in the vast wilderness, beyond the cruelty of her parents and the greed of strangers, a fate waited that could not be bought or sold, a fate that would test her, but also reveal a strength she did not yet know she carried. And as the wagons rolled forward, creaking under the weight of their load, she pressed her hand against her chest and swore in silence that though she had been betrayed, though she had been cast aside like nothing, she would endure. She would walk through the fire of this betrayal, because she believed that even the barren soil of her heart could still hold the seed of something greater, something worth living for, something worth fighting to protect. Though she did not yet see it, though the night gave her no comfort, though her tears fell unseen into the dust, she carried that faint light within, and it kept her moving, kept her breathing, kept her alive beneath the endless western sky. The night settled heavy over the wooden streets of a small western town, lanterns flickering in the windows while the sound of horses echoed faintly from the livery. And as she stepped down from the wagon that had carried her away from everything she once knew, her heart pounded with the weight of her fate. Yet in the corner of the dusty street, near the saloon's dim light, a man watched her with quiet eyes that held both sorrow and kindness, a gaze unlike the cold stares of others, for he was no stranger to loss, his broad shoulders carrying the weight of 5 children who clung to him like shadows during the day and wept in silence at night, for he was a widower whose life had been carved by tragedy. And though the town knew him as a strong cowboy who worked the land with relentless hands, his soul was tired and his home stood empty of warmth, his children yearning for a mother's touch that could no longer be found. And as his gaze lingered on her, he did not see a barren woman cast away by her family. He saw someone whose pain mirrored his own, a woman marked by betrayal but still standing, still breathing, still alive, and though she did not notice him at first, her eyes fixed on the ground to hide her shame, he felt drawn to her in a way he could not explain, as if the wind itself whispered that two broken lives were meant to collide. And he stood there, watching with a heart both cautious and restless, imagining how her gentle presence might soothe the restless hearts of his children, how her silence might hold the strength his family needed. Yet doubt pulled at him like the dark sky overhead, reminding him that trust was a dangerous thing in a world built on hardship. But the longer he watched, the stronger the pull became, and he knew deep within that this moment was not chance. It was the beginning of something he could not ignore, for he had seen many faces in his life, hardened men, desperate women, wandering souls, but never had he seen eyes like hers, carrying storms and yet hiding a fragile light. And though he remained in the shadows, his resolve grew with each passing second, that before another dawn came, he would step forward, he would speak. He would offer her something she had been denied, not as a gift from pity but as a choice of the heart. And as the wind howled across the town and the night stretched on, his children slept unaware in the small house at the edge of the prairie, dreaming restless dreams of a mother long gone, while their father, the lonely cowboy with weary eyes, stood frozen in the glow of lantern light, watching a stranger who might soon change not just his life, but the lives of the 5 young souls who waited for a love they thought would never return. Asterisk. The cowboy's boots pressed against the dirt as he stepped out of the shadows, his hat low against the wind, each stride carrying the weight of a decision that could not be undone. And though the whispers of the townsfolk floated around him like a chorus of doubt, he kept his eyes fixed on her, the woman who stood alone under the faint glow of the lantern, her face lowered, her spirit wounded yet unbroken. And when he stopped before her, silence stretched between them like a fragile bridge. His voice steady though his heart thundered as he said her name softly, not the name given with shame but spoken as if it held value. And for the first time since her world had been torn apart, she felt seen, not as a burden but as a woman worth more than the price paid for her. And the people nearby exchanged glances, their murmurs sharp with judgment, calling him reckless, questioning why a man with 5 children would bind himself to someone the world called Barren. But his jaw tightened with quiet defiance, for he was not choosing her because of what she could not give. He was choosing her because he believed in what she carried within, the strength to love, the patience to heal, the courage to stand when life demanded more than flesh and blood could offer. And though she hesitated, fear rising in her chest like a tide, his eyes held her still, eyes lined with sorrow but also warmth, and she sensed the truth in them that this man was no stranger to loss, that he carried grief as heavy as her own. And as the night deepened, the sound of the wind beating against the wooden shutters of the town seemed to fade, leaving only the steady rhythm of his words as he told her she had a place, not as a transaction, not as a burden, but as a partner who could walk beside him through the storms ahead. And something inside her, long buried under pain, stirred with trembling hope, fragile but alive. And when the whispers grew louder, when the stares cut sharper, he reached out his hand, offering her not wealth or promises of ease, but the chance to build something no one else could define. And though her hand shook, though her voice faltered, she lifted her gaze to his and saw a man choosing her not with pity but with conviction. And in that moment the chains of her betrayal loosened, her heart daring to believe that perhaps love could grow even in barren soil. And as she placed her hand in his, the night seemed to hold its breath, the judgment of the town fading into the distance. For this was not their story to write, it was hers and his. 2 broken lives risking everything for the chance to create a home where 5 waiting children dreamed of warmth, and where a woman long discarded might finally discover she had never been empty at all. The house at the edge of the prairie stood quiet when she first entered, its wooden walls carrying the echoes of laughter that had long faded. And as 5 pairs of young eyes studied her from behind doorframes and corners, their gazes held both fear and suspicion. For to them she was a stranger who had stepped into the place once filled by the mother they had lost. And though her heart ached with the weight of their silence, she carried her fear quietly, determined not to let it break her resolve. Yet every small gesture became a test. Every meal she prepared met with cautious glances. Every word spoken answered with hesitation, and at night she lay awake listening to the creak of the floorboards, wondering if she was strong enough to fill the emptiness that lingered in their hearts. But slowly, with patience woven through her trembling hands, she began to carve her place among them, stirring warmth into stews that filled their bellies, stitching worn clothes with careful fingers, whispering prayers into the quiet night when one of them coughed in their sleep, and one evening as the fire crackled low, she told them a story, her voice soft but steady, painting images of faraway skies and brave heroes, and she watched as their guarded eyes softened, their shoulders eased, their breath slowed to match the rhythm of her words. And in that moment something fragile shifted, a bridge forming where once there had been only distance, and the days that followed tested her further. Scraped knees to tend, nightmares to soothe, quarrels to calm. And though fear still whispered that she might fail them, her actions spoke louder. Each wound she cleaned, each tear she brushed away, each smile she coaxed from lips too young to carry such sorrow, all of it slowly weaving her into the fabric of their lives. And though the path was not free of struggle, though there were days when one child still turned away or another clung to memories of the past, she did not retreat, she stood firm, offering not perfection but presence, not promises but consistency. And it was in those ordinary acts of love that the children began to find in her something they had believed lost forever. A safe place where fear could rest, a steady hand to guide them, a heart that chose them even when the world had not. And as the nights grew colder and the prairie winds howled against the windows, the warmth inside that house grew stronger, binding them together not by blood but by choice. And she realized with quiet wonder that the emptiness she once believed defined her had become the very space where love could bloom, teaching her that family was not only born, it was built. And in the eyes of those 5 children who once watched her with doubt, she began to see trust, fragile yet real, the kind of trust that could turn a broken home into a place of belonging. Seasons turned over the prairie, and with every sunrise the house that once echoed with sorrow now breathed with laughter, her voice weaving through the walls like a promise that no night could silence. And though the world had once branded her barren, she discovered a gift greater than birth, for she became the soil where love took root, nurturing 5 children who no longer looked at her with fear, but with the trust of hearts that finally felt safe. And the cowboy who had once stood alone found in her not just a partner, but a woman who chose him when the rest of the world had turned its back. And together they built a life stronger than whispers, richer than gold. Their family bound not by what was lost, but by what was created. And in the heart of the Wild West, she was no longer the girl who was sold. She was the mother who chose, and that choice changed everything forever.